Okay, welcome everybody. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. This is just a reminder that today's presentation will be recorded and posted on the Whitburn Center's website and YouTube channel. We ask that you please keep your mics on mute. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. My name is Lisa Lewis, and I'm the Administrative Manager in the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about the Whitburn Center. The Whitburn Center was established in the fall of 2021 through a generous donation from our founding benefactor, UWO alumni Jerry Whitburn. Our mission is to conduct nonpartisan, practical, applied research focused on elevating and improving governance, professional management, and public policy in Wisconsin and beyond. Our vision is to build local government, nonprofit, and community capacity to promote the common good. To do this work, it requires bringing people together in spaces like this one to work together to share knowledge and equip public professionals with tools and resources to better understand the dynamic topic areas surrounding Wisconsin's public sector. And now I'll turn things over to Dr. Michael Ford, who will moderate our panel discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and thanks everyone for being here. So the way this will work, we have two fabulous guests, Tracy Ogden and Josh Kilgus, and I'm going to give a fairly short presentation of some research we did on collective impact in the nonprofit sector with the generous grant from the Tommy Thompson Center at UW-Madison. And then we'll have a panel discussion with Josh and Tracy. So I'll introduce them after we get through the research part of this. But please, if you have questions or anything along the way, just put them in the chat, and we'll certainly have time for that at the end of the presentation as well. All right, can everybody see my screen? Anybody?
We can see it, but it's cut there. Now it looks like we can see the whole thing. There we go.
You can see it. All right. I appreciate that, Josh. It's always interesting when you're presenting online because you don't really get the feedback. When I'm teaching in class in person, when people are falling asleep, I know I'm doing something wrong, and I can't necessarily see that online. But anyways, so like I said, this is a research project that myself and Lisa Lewis conducted last year, and some of the genesis of this project really stems from conversations that we had with folks in our broader network, so people serving in local government and people serving in the nonprofit sector. We found that oftentimes local government would say they wanted to utilize the nonprofit sector, often when they were making cuts to services or trying to solve some wicked challenges, some of those things, sticky issues like homelessness. But it never really seemed to translate into an actual tangible plan. There wasn't necessarily that cooperation and collaboration there between government and the nonprofit sector, and sometimes even between nonprofit organizations. So we really wanted to dig into that using this collective impact framework. So that's the background. Like I said, we had a grant for this from the Thompson Center that we're very thankful for. So some background here, and I'll try not to get too Professor Ford on you here. But government failure theory is a theory in public administration that basically broadly says, I guess it's a theory in nonprofit administration too, that there's certain services that government is just simply not well positioned to provide. And when government's unable to provide these services, it's up to the nonprofit sector, either in collaboration or by itself to step in and fill in those gaps. And again, yeah, sounds really good. Rainbows and butterflies are great, but what's the actual mechanism by which they're addressing these government failures? That's where we want to understand it. And there's practical questions that came up in some of our pre-work for this research. Like what do you do if the nonprofit sector is limited in size, scope, and capacity? What happens if you're in a rural area where you might only have one really large nonprofit organization that's kind of doing everything? What happens if the nonprofit sector is fragmented and maybe not in agreement about how to address some of these challenges facing a community, a county, a state? Again, more questions than answers. Hopefully we'll leave you with some answers, but here's an example from here in Oshkosh. And this certainly comes from some of my service in city government and just a conversation that's happening in communities across the state and across the country. This challenge of people experiencing homelessness. When you really break down who is actually in charge or working on this issue of addressing homelessness, it gets really fragmented really quickly. Certainly city government, and I'm thinking right here in Oshkosh, has a role, but oftentimes that's a policing role or it might be a land use role. County government here in Winnebago County plays a role. They receive some ARPA funding, so federal COVID relief funds that they dedicated to a case manager that was helping with some individual cases. OASD, the Oshkosh Area School District, is providing services for children that are experiencing homelessness. Then we have this whole world of the nonprofit sector, the day-by-day warming shelter, the emergency shelter, the COTS program, more geared toward families. You have Father Cars, which is a Catholic-based organization that's also addressing homeless issues, but has some requirements for people to get access to those services. You have the Tiny Homes Project up on the north side of town. We certainly have healthcare providers. We have organizations like the Boys and Girls Club that Tracy will talk about that are dealing with individuals and families and children who may be affected by homelessness. So basically, we have all these different organizations that are all working on this one pressing policy issue. And you can make the argument that each individual actor is succeeding to a degree, but when we're talking about the goal of societal change or really getting at this societal ill, I think we need more than that because the community problem still persists, even if we're doing a decent job in our little silos sometimes of addressing some of the, I guess, the symptoms or even some of the causes. So again, just setting up this key question is how do we coordinate this effort of nonprofits so they can work together and also work with the government sector? So we turn to the collective impact framework. So if you're familiar with Kanya and Kramer, this is an article that was in, I believe, the Stanford Innovation Journal. I think I'm naming that correct. I guess the source doesn't matter, but they proposed this collective impact framework to try to give a little bit of a theory about how nonprofit organizations and government organizations can work in collaboration to solve some of these wicked issues. And they have these 5 characteristics that are a key component to a successful collective impact initiative, at least in theory. First, agreement on a common agenda, meaning everyone has to be on the same page of what they're trying to actually accomplish. A shared measurement system. There has to be common metrics, common goal setting. The ability to engage in mutually enforcing activities, meaning that what one organization is doing is reinforcing what another organization is doing, as opposed to duplicating efforts, or worse yet, working at cross purposes. And to do that, you have to have open and continuous communication and some type of formal means of communication. And I think the umbrella kind of, I guess, organizational element to try to get those first 4 components right is the formation of some type of backbone organization where the common agenda can be discussed, set, measurement system developed, tracked, etc. Again, all really nice things to have, really hard things to do in practice. So we dug into these questions. How can, or just can, these collective impact initiatives work when we have various levels of philanthropic capacity and various levels of buy-in and even knowledge, as you'll see in a second, of what collective impact initiatives actually are. And then we propose a framework based off the second question of how local governments might be able to serve as a backbone organization coordinating efforts. And don't worry, we'll show some of the pros and cons of that type of approach at the end. So our methodology, which is pretty common for the work we do at the Whitburn Center, is we try to talk to the folks on the ground that are actually doing the work, trying to take this, the stuff from theory, research, and marry it with reality. So the first thing we did is develop a survey that we gave to Wisconsin county leaders. We surveyed 25 different county leaders. So this included elected executives and hired administrators, but basically the heads of these counties. It was a response rate of 35%, but again, only 25 of them. So if you've taken my methods course, that's a pretty low overall number. So take it for what it's worth here. I think the most in-depth information we got were from these 30-minute interviews we did, Lisa and I, with 15 different nonprofit leaders in Wisconsin. And we purposely targeted 15 leaders from around the state who were working for either community foundations, United Ways, or other types of umbrella agencies that weren't just one single nonprofit, but were nonprofits that were either engaged in collective impact initiatives or familiar with the idea and had a broad knowledge of the nonprofit sector in their area. And we piloted everything. And you can read the whole report if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the methodology, but that's the basics. Let's get to the results here. One thing that stood out right away is I can preach about the importance of collective impact, but it's a little concerning that only 9 of the 25 county leaders even knew what it was. So that tells me there's a language problem first off, that a lot of our county leaders who we say that, county does human services, we think they'd be familiar with this. They might be familiar with the idea of collaboration and the concepts behind collective impact, but that's not the terminology they use. So that really stuck out to us. On the other hand, most of them said they were at least familiar with their county's nonprofit sector. A little disturbing that 7 of them said they really didn't have an understanding of how their county's nonprofit sector worked or what they did. But perhaps that's a function of how long they've been in their job, et cetera. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We started to dig into more specific questions, and this is a basic Likert scale, asking these county leaders on a scale of 1 to 5, what extent do you agree? So the higher the number, the more they agree. You'll see that there was a lot of neutrals, 3 being the neutral. People tended to disagree to neutral that organizations were using common performance metrics across organizational efforts. When it came to collaboration, a lot of neutral. Whether they were duplicating services, a lot of neutral. I can read into this that I think it's more a function of the fact that a lot of these county leaders maybe weren't very engaged with what was going on with the nonprofit organizations in their community, which is probably why they punted and tended to answer neutral. When we asked questions, we asked rankings, basically. We took a list of policy issues that were identified as being very important to Wisconsin communities. And we asked these county leaders, how important are these policy issues in your community, and how effective do you believe your county government is at addressing these things? And this gap analysis was a little concerning, but very, very eye-opening, that the things that the county leaders thought were most important, economic development and affordable housing, were also the things that they felt they were least effective at. So definitely there's a space there for the nonprofit sector to have a major role, because the county's basically saying, yeah, this stuff's hugely important and we're not good at it. So let's get to the interviews. Like I said, we did these 15 interviews, and a few broad themes stuck out, and I'll share some specific answers for you to chew on, or some quotes that I think are important. And yes, Richard, I just saw your thing. We will definitely have questions at the end, but feel free to put any questions in the chat too. Happy to answer those. Lack of housing, growing homeless population is a common problem. And I know I used that as an example at first, but in all of these interviews, that came up as one of the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin communities that the nonprofit sector felt that they were, or leaders in the nonprofit sector felt they were responsible for helping solve. It took a while in a couple of these interviews to get people to freely admit this. A lot of questions like, will I be quoted? And I'd say anonymously, and then they'd start telling me, well, we have too many agencies. People are doing the same thing. We have duplication of services and duplication of work. And when we dug a little deeper into that, you found out that a lot of that was donor driven, where individual donors favored individual nonprofits and kind of drove some of this duplication. COVID came up over and over again, as it seems to in all of these different research projects these days. But I think the big concern that we identified was fatigue. A lot of these nonprofit leaders said that a lot of donors stepped up during COVID for some of these immediate needs, but they're pretty tired out now. A common theme was, we have very generous donors and they're giving more, but there's fewer of them. So we're asking more and more of a smaller and smaller donor base. And some of our rural leaders in particular pointed this out, that there's only a couple major donors in the area and they're tired out. And then broadly, collaboration being a big challenge. And these are some of the quotes about collaboration that I thought were most powerful at illustrating our findings. One common thing was that people felt like donors expected more than they should have when they gave to a nonprofit organization. So saying basically, don't act like you're becoming an owner of what we do because you're collaborating with us. Collaboration has to be true give and take. Sometimes it was inertia. I see that second quote there. Organizations just stuck in their ways, not willing to try new things. So the idea of collaborating would be scary. It would require a change in thinking. The unwillingness of individual nonprofit leaders or their organization to give up something for the greater good. Individual ego came up. Struggle to keep people at the table. That was another common theme that yeah, we tried collaborating and we had a first meeting that went really well. 2 months later, the heads of the nonprofits were no longer at those meetings. They were sending underlings, and eventually people just stopped coming to those meetings. So a lot of it, momentum at the beginning, well-intentioned efforts that never seemed to pan out. This sounds kind of negative, but I think workload was a big theme too. Folks saying that basically we have so much immediate work to do and needs that we're meeting on a daily basis that we don't have time to be thinking about how to set up a collective impact framework or collaborate with some other folks. Like we're actually doing the work. And I guess that shows up here in this next list of quotes on barriers to collective impact initiatives. Nonprofits being spread so thin. Right. How do you unify a community around a common effort to address an issue like homelessness when there's not enough services to go around, period? Logistical challenges around different systems, people measuring things in different ways, having different processes. So it just doesn't meld together when you start to try to collaborate. Sometimes just role confusion and good old-fashioned territorialism. People worried about their mission being co-opted by another organization. The nature of government came up a lot. The short life cycle of government leadership. We had a couple people tell, I won't say horror stories, but interesting stories about that. Yeah, we had a new mayor come in. They were really excited about collaborating with the nonprofit sector, but 2 years later they were gone. So we put all this investment into an effort, and then political turnover is not a priority anymore. Right? We can't afford to jeopardize our mission for short-term political whims. Then there was the issue of trust and red tape, that government's just difficult to work with, and that too often government was seen as a barrier, someone that they wanted to dictate or control the process as opposed to be a true collaborator in the process. And Richard just asked in the chat whether these questions were only from nonprofits. So these quotes I'm sharing with you right now are specifically from nonprofit leaders. We do have some quotes from county leaders in the report, and you'll note that it mirrors a lot. There's certainly the fair share of complaints on the government side too about struggles to work with the nonprofit sector. So something we propose as an idea to try to combat some of these challenges is whether or not municipal government itself can serve as that backbone organization that can facilitate collective impact initiatives in Wisconsin municipalities. And so the framework we propose utilizes state statute around citizen boards and commissions. If you work in and around municipal government, you know this. You have citizen boards and commissions for all kinds of things, and the ability to create new boards and commissions voluntarily. And we argued that you could utilize that to create a backbone board or commission that's populated by individuals representing the nonprofit sector, working on a very specific policy issue. So under this model, we'd have some type of dedicated city staff member who's serving on the commission as the liaison with municipal government, representatives from each of the active organizations that are involved in this collective impact initiative, then also representatives from overlapping governments. So it doesn't just have to be nonprofit organizations, but county, school district, all the different players. And we focused on government and nonprofit, but there's nothing that would preclude private sector actors from being involved in this, whether they're donors or providing services themselves. But the idea is to have a formal structure where everybody has a seat at the table. And the charge would be really along the lines of those first four characteristics of the collective impact model. Asking this group to develop measurable community goals that can be integrated into a city strategic plan, so that we do have common high-level indicators that can be pursued by the group. And I think being able to integrate it with an actual formal city strategic plan that's being voted on by an elected body that represents the people is a really powerful way to demonstrate commitment from that municipality. Articulation of a system of common metrics to track progress. That's a huge point. And I think having the mechanism to actually track this stuff being housed in city government. And if you're a well-developed city government, you were already tracking metrics as part of your strategic plan, and hopefully publishing that quarterly, what have you. Why not integrate some community indicators into that system as well? Being able to articulate each organization's portfolio, area of responsibility, and having a formal mechanism by which to change course in response to progress. So that all sounds really great, right? But there's pros and cons here, right? There's reasons it could work. Ideally, the municipality is putting in resources. So there's a carrot there for individuals to participate. And the argument I always make to municipalities that say we don't have money for this type of thing, I'm saying, well, think of the money you're already putting into trying to address some of these policy issues. You can redirect some of that towards supporting the nonprofit sector as part of our cohesive strategy. And this goes along the lines of, government reform initiatives that have existed for a long time about government being more of a director of resources as opposed to always being the direct provider. So certainly, yeah, that funding and support is very important. Marrying community goals between the nonprofit and public sector. I think that's the most powerful thing because it also allows us to avoid the blame game when things don't work. Because when you have a fragmented group of organizations, both public and nonprofit, that are all trying to address an issue like homelessness, it's real easy to say, what we're doing is working. Problem's the county, or the problem's the city, or the problem's this nonprofit or this nonprofit. And once you start getting into the blame game, what you're not doing is making progress. So it comes back to that final bullet point there, having common goals and metrics with true buy-in. Again, really easy for me to say after doing a research project, as we'll hear later from Josh and Tracy, a lot harder to actually do in practice because we know territorialism, distrust, we don't always agree on what the actual goals are. The extent of the challenge, I keep using homelessness as the example, but that's a heck of a challenge. I don't know how we would define solving that issue or if it is solvable, what progress looks like. That's not something we could all agree upon. Then certainly political turnover, progress on most of the most challenging social issues in any municipality, any county. It's going to take some continuity and focus over time, and that doesn't always align with political leadership, donor capacity, or even, I guess, community patience. So, in conclusion here, before we turn to the actual experts, certainly there's a lot of agreement about what the most pressing challenges are right now facing Wisconsin communities where at least government leaders see a role for the nonprofit sector. A pressing challenge in many places is that there's no resources there for a backbone organization, which is why we propose government itself being the backbone organization. I've shared with you some roadblocks that hopefully we can find some solutions to overcome. But I think the big picture here is that we wanted to present some research that shows what could be possible if we took that government nonprofit relationship beyond collaboration, beyond contracting, and really made it integrated. And I know we've had even discussions here at UWO recently, and I'm probably talking out of turn. If any of these UWO people are on the call, I apologize. But how do we integrate, the strategic plan at UW Oshkosh with the strategic plan for the city of Oshkosh? How does that integrate with the nonprofit sector? How do we set these broad community goals so that all of our major institutions, and I'm using Oshkosh as an example because I live here and it's where I work, but this can work for any community. How do we get all of these institutions that have some power, some influence, some capacity, moving in a common measurable direction where everybody has a seat at the table and can play a role? So to answer your question, Richard, is there any thought to create a framework pilot program for a region? Just me complaining about it, I suppose, and offering advice. But I do think, Richard, that is the ultimate goal, where I'd like to see this research go, that we can find some players in a community that can actually pilot this. So we should definitely talk more about that if that's something you'd be interested in pursuing up in your neck of the woods. But I'll shut up now because I've used up my time here, and I'll introduce our guests, and you can tear apart the ideas I shared and share some of your experiences. But first, I need to introduce you. So, We have two guests here today. Both are UWO alumni, which is great because part of the Whitburn Center mission is to show just how cool our UWO network is. It drives me nuts when we bring in outside experts, and we have experts right here. Our first guest is Tracy Ogden. Tracy has a Bachelor's of Science in Advertising and Public Relations from UWO. She's been with the Boys and Girls Club for 15 years, has served in marketing, resource development, and operational roles before taking over as CEO. She has a huge list of accomplishments. The biggest accomplishment, I think, is just go drive by the new facility, or better yet, go visit it and see what's going on in there. It's pretty dang impressive. So I'm very happy to have Tracy here. Josh Kilgus has a Bachelor of Science in Human Services Leadership from UWO, but is also a current MPA student at UW Oshkosh. And he founded Solutions for Changemakers to empower nonprofit leaders and boards by addressing the critical areas of strategic planning, governance, and executive leadership. And as we were talking before, people came on, also has a background in law enforcement, so has been on different sides of some of these sticky issues facing Wisconsin communities. So welcome, both of you, Tracy and Josh. And I know I gave you a very superficial introduction, but I can ask you to introduce yourself. I'll start with you, Tracy.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say. As Michael said, I've been with the club for 15 years. I've always worked for kids in my career. I had actually started in education and then switched to journalism when I realized I would be an awful teacher. For those of you, to just give a brief recap of the Boys and Girls Club, my favorite thing to do is to give people a tour and to show people what we do, because the first thing people say to me is, I had no idea that this was the scope of services that the Boys and Girls Club does for kids in the area. So we are 55 years old. We had a really strong community partnership. We serve out of our new facilities about 1,800 kids out of this location. That's 5 to 18-year-olds in our building. We are in 12 schools, including I have full-time staff all day in Oshkosh North, Oshkosh West, and Val Phillips doing a mentoring program. We also have a year-round site in Amro for kids out there. We do everything from homework help after school to sports leagues. We have mentoring programs. We have SEL programming, mental health services. The kids have snack and dinner here every night on non-school days. Every time the school district is closed, we are open from 6:30 to 5:30, and our kids get breakfast, lunch, and snack. We do lots of programming on getting kids ready for college, getting kids ready for technical schools or trades. We love to show our kids the community and what they can be a part of. One of the things that people may not know about us, which is very unique to Oshkosh, is that we serve basic needs here at the Boys and Girls Club. So kids that need it can shower here on a daily basis. We make sure that they have clean clothes. We make sure they have new clothes if they need it, warm clothes, hygiene products. We do grocery, gas. We send food home when they need it. We do energy assistance, rent assistance. We partner with anybody who can help our kids. As Michael said, we just finished about a $19 million construction project where we doubled the size of this club, because during COVID, when school was shut down, our attendance went up 70%. Our kids needed a place to go, and we needed more space. The other thing that we really wanted to do was highlight our basic needs. It is quite honestly overwhelming for our staff for the amount of things that our kids and that our families need. So we started in 2019 with partnering with agencies to say, how do we work better together? How do we collaborate better to connect families to services? So the part of the addition that we did is a community center where we have up to 30 nonprofits that work to help case manage families in need. And I will say that for our club services, for kids to come here every single day after school, it is $25 a school year, but 65% of our kids cannot pay that. So.
Well, thank you, Tracy. So I assume that then you subsidize it with donors?
We do. We are 100% donor driven and grant driven. We are not a city, county, or state funded agency in any way.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, tell us a little bit about your background and your current work.
Yeah, so in the final semester of my MPA at UW Oshkosh, yeah, so my background from staff member, executive director, board chair, a lot of background in the nonprofit space. Started about a year ago, Solutions for Change Makers, where we, like Dr. Ford said, help nonprofit organizations and mission-driven organizations with governance, strategic planning, executive coaching, and such. Most of my experience is within that United Way network that we reference in this report, and often a backbone of collaborative work. And so much of my perspective comes from that experience as well.
Okay, let's stick with you, Josh. I guess in the region, and you're based in Appleton, correct?
Yep.
What are the most pressing policy issues facing both the Appleton area, but the Wisconsin, Fox Valley region? Right.
Yeah, well, so I think a lot of it is represented in your report. So I looked up today on 211counts.org the last year of calls for our region for the Fox Cities call center.
What is 211? I have to interrupt you there.
Sure. So 211 is that 24/7 information and referral call center that people can call to be referred to resources in the area for health and human services related issues. It's also a hub in times of disaster. Was activated for COVID as an information line. So just an incredibly under-resourced thing for the entire nation, by the way. But so I looked, 32% of calls, of all the calls, the highest of all, come from housing and shelter. If you look into those details just a little bit more, the highest of that is rent assistance at about 40%. But shortly after is low-cost housing and then shelters at 20%. So really homelessness and people finding shelter remains a large issue. And then housing as an issue is only secondary to mental health and addictions for calls. But and least of those is childcare in many ways, but that may not be, that's very much not indicative of what the community is seeing as far as childcare related issues. It just may not be something that the 211 resource is being utilized as much for. So, but certainly those are the things that I hear regularly as the issues that we're facing.
Awesome. Tracy, are you seeing the same thing in Oshkosh?
Absolutely. I mean, we do have a lot of our kids that we know that deal with homeless issues and they deal with housing issues. I think for us, we have the unique ability to help families without the red tape of government, right? If we have a family going homeless or a family that's struggling, we can take it upon ourselves to make calls and try to connect them with people right away to try to get them, even if it's a hotel voucher for tonight, but just to get them somewhere safe to go. Food insecurities is a big one for us, making sure that our families have the food that they need. We try to partner with the pantry or with Feeding America. But mental health services has really been the one that has exploded for us. It's become a necessity for us to have staff available for our kids.
Well, now I have to press you on this because you mentioned red tape. I'm jumping ahead here on the questions, but do you work with government? I mean, you mentioned it before too, not having the funding, and I guess how does that idea strike you of having a closer relationship with government?
We talked a lot, and I talked with some, agencies when we were talking about the idea of the community center, because, we as a club try to look at it as our sole responsibility to serve our kids and our members, and how are we doing everything for them. At some point for us, it becomes how do we financially afford to do all this? I have an incredible team that would never say no. And it's always absolutely, we will find a way, which we do. And this project in serving more kids, we went from, being able to hold 300 kids to now holding 500 kids just in this building, which is fantastic. But we have to provide the resources to be able to do that and to be able to sustain. So for us, the question is, is there pieces in government that could support those efforts? And maybe it's within mental health services, or maybe it's in housing, or what it may be, so that it's not something that's immediately coming out of our budget.
Does it worry you at all about working closely with government in terms
Yes.
of the red tape? Yeah.
Only in terms of, and I've watched this, and you're watching it right now, but there are clubs and other nonprofits that solely, are funded based on government or federal funding. What happens if that dries up tomorrow? What is your long-term sustainability plan if you've got a program or something that's funded, and then it gets cut? What happens to your people? Example, probably 12 years ago, we realized, or didn't realize, but we had put the focus on serving our kids dinner. They were having snack here after school, and then they were leaving here and sometimes not being fed again until school the next day. So we applied for a big federal grant, actually at the time, to start serving dinner, which was lasted 1 year. How would I go back to the kids and then say, well, now we're not going to serve you dinner anymore, because the grant has dried up?
No, I won't say good stuff, 'cause that's not good stuff, but thanks for sharing. It's a good example. Josh, I guess I'll ask you a similar question. Your experience working in the sector now as a consultant, do you find organizations hesitant to work with government?
Yeah, so I don't know that I've experienced as much yet in the consulting role, but if I look back to my previous roles, I think I see a lot of the same kind of barriers, the reliability on that political will to be able to continue through as an organization. Also, it can be sporadic as to which, if we're talking about local jurisdictions, even just thinking about the Fox City specifically, one municipality can be very great at looking proactively at some of these issues and working with United Ways and nonprofits, while others don't see that value. And so I think that pocket-like nature of the way that government might work with nonprofits is certainly a barrier to those collaborations.
How about the overall capacity of the nonprofit sector in your region, Josh? Just curious how you see it and how it's changing.
Yeah, well, so I do think that overall the Fox Valley region is rich in resources compared to a lot of different areas. Most of my career it was here, and I heard a lot of people talk about it in that way. Now that I am working more directly with more of those rural communities or outside of the Fox Valley region, it is a whole different system, right? I think we take for granted that. I think we talk a lot about collaboration and do it better than other organizations, but there is so much room to grow to be able to combat some of these very intertwined, wicked issues, right?
I guess Tracy, same question to you. How do you see the nonprofit capacity in the area, and how's it changing?
I think that agree that we have a very strong nonprofit base in the community. I think that collaborating and working together, I think should be a must. I look at some of our funders, and I get their frustration of, okay, well, you've got 4 different agencies essentially doing the same thing. How are you working better, together? Including the housing piece. I think about it, if I have a family going homeless, okay, who do I call based on family size, right? If it's a mom and 1 child, that's one thing. If it's a mom and 5 kids, that's another thing. If that's a 17-year-old that's going homeless, that's another thing. So it would be great if there was a way to kind of encompass all of the housing needs together, so that you had more of a one-stop shop to know where people should go. But I think we are very fortunate to have the agencies that we do. I think for the community, and I think it's everywhere, it's an education piece of knowing what people do and knowing where to go. I know it's one of the biggest things that our families run into of, I don't know where to go. Where's the right, is it Fisk? Is it this? Is it this? Is it Advocare or Advocap? Like, where do we go?
Well, that's a really good point. That feeds into my next question about what are the biggest barriers? I guess barriers both facing your clients, but then also barriers that you might face or the organizations you work with face in trying to work together in collaboration?
I think that a transportation barrier is a big thing, at least for our families. If you have families that don't have reliable transportation, we have some language barriers that become an issue. And then I think it's just navigating the system. We talk about that if we have a family that is behind in their rent, we just pick up the phone and call the landlord and have that just conversation of how far are they behind? How can we support them? Is it 1 month to catch them up? And then our staff kind of case manage the families to kind of investigate further. Because sometimes it's a one-off situation where they might be changing jobs and they just need that little bit to get them through, or there's a big difference if it's a long-term, they're not going to be working.
And just a quick follow-up. I mean, you've done such an interesting job bringing other nonprofit organizations into your orbit. And I'm just curious if anybody was resistant to that. You don't have to name them. I'm just curious or why.
I think are agencies that are concerned about losing their identity. Now, in the community center model, everybody rents space, they have their own identity, but I think people were concerned that it would look like they fell under the umbrella of the Boys and Girls Club, which is what we didn't want it to be. We wanted to be that each agency was spotlighted to just provide a one-stop shop for families.
Good answer. I like it. Josh, a little bit of a different question. I guess this is maybe the biggest question is, do you think these collective impact strategies are they realistic? Not even talking specifically about government as backbone or the ideas we presented, but just the general concept. Is that a realistic concept?
So I think like a lot of things, like issues are often things that we're not going to be able to eradicate, right? Mental health will never be fully eradicated. I think that this idea of collaboration in this way is collective impact is probably never going to be fully realized by organizations, but perhaps something we strive for. When we think about barriers, right, the scarcity mindset, territory, all of those things are certainly barriers. But I even remember speaking in our class, Dr. Ford, right, about the collaboration of even just talking about an issue like mental health. As we become more and more polarized as a community, when we try to do collective impact in an area like mental health, it's difficult to very quickly then start to break down that data and see that there is race that is involved with that. There is LGBTQ issues. How do we treat trans folks in the mental health realm? And so to find those shared agendas, that shared measurement can be difficult between nonprofits and certainly politically divisive on a political level. And so I think to a lot of your work, Dr. Ford, I think it's going to have to keep happening at a local level and show people success stories and how it can work on a big scale. But yeah, certainly something to strive for.
No, that's really interesting. And even in a report, the politics of it didn't come up much, but that's a really good point. When you think about the things the nonprofit sector is dealing with, politics are intertwined with all of it. Maybe that's a place where people are skeptical about working with government because that does mean working with the politicians too sometimes. And it's really interesting. How about you, Tracy? You think this stuff's realistic? And you're in a unique position where you're kind of doing it. So we know it's realistic to a degree. So I guess two questions. One, I'll ask you, right? Why do you think it's realistic?
Mm-hmm.
And two, what do you wish you could get from government to help you?
I think it is realistic, but I don't think it's realistic for everybody. The amount of time and effort that it goes into doing it. We're probably one of the bigger nonprofits in town with 130 employees, and it is a stretch for us. We don't have unlimited resources to pay staff to do more administrative work because our focus is, our work on the kids. For a small nonprofit, I don't know how they would do that. Just in terms of the reporting it's time. I guess from local government, I guess it would be nice if there was funding available for nonprofits that are helping to subsidize community need. Because when I speak to funders, or I speak to donors, or I speak to agencies, or whoever it may be, we try to talk about the impact that the club has on its club members. And then we have the conversation of, if we were not here, where would all of these children go? Where would their need, their needs be met? Where would the partnerships be? And what would your community look like if you did not have a Boys and Girls Club? And Oshkosh is unique from a standpoint of, there's a lot of agencies or a lot of communities that have lots of youth serving organizations. Oshkosh doesn't have that. These kids don't have a lot of places that they can go after school. So.
Good stuff. Josh, similar question. I mean, what do you think government could do to assist the nonprofit sector, some of these areas?
Yeah, well, I think in many ways being that backbone agency, again, is one of those things to strive for. But I think funding certainly can be one of the pieces for that. Often when we look at some of these issues that we're addressing, right, they can only be done through expansively through government entities. And so there is also like a boots on the ground relationship that government can have with nonprofits to be able to learn more about the conditions of the work there. If you think about United Way, for instance, right? I talked about the 211 data, but if we think about ALICE research, the asset limited income constrained employed, right? These are tools, it is data, these are collaborative things that we can do together between governmental leaders and nonprofits right now to help focus some of our goals at a local level.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that's not happening in so many places? That's for either of you. But yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Well, I mean, some of it I think I mean, it mostly I think comes to capacity. I think it is difficult both from the government standpoint and nonprofit to be able to have the capacity both from a staffing standpoint and from the financial standpoint of that. But it does not surprise me that your report showed that collective impact was not something that was readily understood in government leaders, because in my experience working with a lot of them, and right, we have examples in this community of collective impact, to the Point Initiative for poverty, for New Mental Health Connection, and some of these other very successful or different degrees of success for some of these in collective impact. But so it's not like it can be done. It has been done, but I think the least involved partner, and it's been a little bit since I've been involved with some of these, has been consistently government entities seeing the value of collective impact.
Mm-hmm.
Does that track with what you're seeing, Tracy?
I would agree. Yes.
Interesting. Well, we have 10 minutes, and I want to make sure the audience can ask questions, because they probably have more intelligent questions than I do. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, I'd love for you to either share them in the chat or raise your hand, and I can call on you, or you can just yell out. Maybe this was just all perfectly clear. Ben, go ahead.
Hey there. Thank you, Tracy and Josh. This was great. Mike, thank you very much. Just the comments and a follow-up.
And who are you, Ben, first off?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Ben Cumner. I'm administrator for the Village of Bellevue. Thank you. Probably should have clarified that out too. But I'm just so excited to talk to you guys about this very insightful topic. So I want to thank you very much for it. But it makes you wonder about government involvement when it comes to some of these things and collective supports of these. And I often wonder if it's simply just because of our decision makers are so fearful of misappropriating funding for something. I mean, I constantly hear from my community in my area of, well, if it's not public police, if it's not public fire, and if it's not snow plowing, it's not a priority for that particular person. Do you often hear those arguments from government? Or what are some of the things that we can say to help our elected officials understand the importance of some of these relationships?
If I can answer that, Ben, and hello. One of the things that I've heard and I've heard throughout the years is, where does it start and where does it stop? So if you decide that, homelessness is the issue, do you not care about kids? And if you decide that, youth is important, well, do you not care about mental health? And then do you not care about the elderly? And then do you not care about, I think what I had heard is that it becomes such a rabbit hole of, the minute you support one, then everybody comes forward of, well, no, wait, hold on, this is just as important, and this is just as important, and this is just as important. And I think a lot of times they're afraid to start, because then where does it stop?
Well, thank you. We certainly understand the long game, and we're not afraid to fund things multiple years just because of how long it takes to do anything. But I appreciate that insight. We don't want to be an organization here in Bellevue that says no to quality ideas.
Right.
Susan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been to a lot of trainings on collective impact, and we've like Oshkosh had Wicked Problems 1 and 2 in addressing or training and collaboration in the community. And what I see is the things you've addressed, when I think that political part is part that you can't probably hammer up enough of, because politics do change. And so you do have that point where you could be funding, backbone funding, and then have a political change, someone elected who says you no longer, your organization can no longer participate in those activities, and really have that abrupt stop, and that those organizations that were dependent on you would be shortchanged. So I think we've seen it historically. We've seen it in different areas. I do want to say I put a housingplan.org, if you ever get a chance to check it out. It's a collective impact model in Milwaukee. It works well because both city and county are working together, and they have the vision mission of everyone at the table, along with the funders at the table, which are large funders, Zilber Family Foundation, Northwestern Mutual. You have some big funders there who are all, collectively working together with the resources, all in the same direction. And it was so, because the situation was so severe in terms of housing and desegregation and all the issues that were there, it had to go in a positive direction, and people working together. And so I think, but in this area, you have so many municipalities and county, municipality, village, town, board, city, and they all have different parameters for which they operate. It's hard to get them at the table all together, wanting to work together and politically. It's just hard.
And Susan, can you introduce where you work?
Oh, sorry. I'm Susan Garcia Franz. I work for Winnebago County Public Health, and I'm working on affordable housing as my main issue. And we're working on a lot of solutions, a lot of pieces at the table, but it's all hands on deck all at once, and we have to be creative and do it in different ways.
Thanks, Susan. Any response, Josh or Tracy?
No, I was going to say, Susan, the other model that I think was so incredibly powerful in Milwaukee was Sojourners, which is one of the models that we looked at, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a city block in the city of Milwaukee that's dedicated to domestic abuse, and there's no wrong door. And it's Children's Hospital, the police, the DA, there's a shelter, there's childcare, there's all of the things to address domestic abuse in Milwaukee. And it's phenomenal to watch the partners work together to help that. And it was one of the models that we looked at when we were looking at the community center. So it's absolutely possible, but it is a lot of work, and the other thing that you run into is change in leadership. So you lose your director, now you're starting over from square one. You change political parties, a lot of times you're starting over, and that's hard.
Anything to add, Josh?
Yeah, no, just to maybe even expand a little bit with Susan and Ben's question earlier, right? Beyond the instability in some of those politics, right, the nonprofit world has a lot of room to grow too, but the ability to be a little innovative and have room, I think, for a fear of failure, which is healthy in innovating these kinds of really systemic, wicked problems. And so sometimes I do think that that can be a lack of innovation as well, in some ways. That bureaucracy really kind of contributes in multiple ways in this situation. So.
Good stuff. Well, we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure I give you both the chance to one, let us know anything else you want to add, but also because part of the mission of the Whitburn Center is human capital development, which sounds like it's a very technical way of saying we want our students to get jobs. So like what advice would you give a student who's considering a career in the nonprofit sector before we go? Go ahead, Josh.
Sure. So before the advice, I just want to say one issue that I think was talked about in the report that isn't given enough, is the change in the way that donors are behaving, both from those low-level donors who want to give more to like a GoFundMe individual and so forth, than to a United Way, which they're losing that trust in. But as wealth is becoming more and more condensed, family foundations and individuals are having much more of an effect on what that means for pet projects, or maybe to induce some incentive for collective impact. But that is certainly something to watch to see that it influences it. To talk to somebody about going into the nonprofit career, know that it is difficult. Those wicked problems are something that can make you an unsung hero, but it is becoming more and more a profession. It is an honorable and noble job, and we need more people who are well versed in the topics.
Thank you, Josh. Tracy.
I agree with the donor base. It's changed dramatically. I also think that donors and funders have gotten much more used to asking questions and digging in and wanting to know more and wanting to know outcomes and wanting to know how their dollars are really truly making an impact. I back in the day, we used to be able to say, well, we serve kids, please fund us. We serve kids. And now donors are asking the question of, what are you doing for this? What are you doing for this? What are you doing for this? And I love that. I love that the gift is meaningful because they can see the change that's happening and they can see where it's directly going. And for any nonprofit, that's got to be the wave of the future of it's for me, it's always the so what question. We serve kids. So what? So do other people. How are we truly changing lives and where is that impact?
All right, that's good stuff. And any advice, Tracy, for people who want to be the next Tracy Ogden change agent?
Oh, it's an amazing job. It really is. Working for a nonprofit gets into your soul. It just does. And I guess I've never worked a for-profit job, but it's get in there and get internships. And, I always tell the kids young adults, when I meet with them, at the university, it's, go intern and get the experience because you get to do a whole lot of different things in a nonprofit than you would get anywhere else. So it's pretty magical.
Thank you. And I should add too, for anyone out there, my first job was in the nonprofit sector. And I remember telling my dad, and his first question was, "Do you get paid for this?" And yes, they also come with a salary, which is important. So we're up against it. It's 1 o'clock. I want to thank both Josh and Tracy for taking the time, and for everybody in the audience here for taking the time to listen. As Lisa mentioned, this is recorded, so this will be posted on the Whitburn Center website. If you're not familiar with the website, check it out. We have all kinds of good reports on there focused on local governance issues, including the nonprofit sector, but also the public sector, the fire service, sustainability, rural issues, and more. If you have any questions for us, you can always email whitburncenter@uwosh.edu or contact myself or Samantha Larson, who is our research director, or Lisa Lewis, our administrative manager, and we'll get back to you. We invite you to come to our next virtual Whitburn Wednesday event on March 12th at noon. That's called Tools for Increasing Trust in Elections and Preventing Political Violence. We'll send more details out about that, but that's based on some work we did over the summer and are continuing to do with generous support from the Carter Center and Cole Philanthropies. Really just trying to help people navigate difficult conversations and restore faith in democracy. No small task there, right? So that should be a good conversation, and more details will be coming out on that as we get closer. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming here, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day and stay warm.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.